Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Minnesota Library Association session. Our session today is titled Special Collections Maneuvers, Lessons Learned from Moving History of Medicine Rare Books and Objects. We will be talking about a project we undertook at the University of Minnesota Libraries on the Twin Cities campus. So a bit about us. I'm Mary Miller, and I'm the Director of Collection Management and Preservation. You'll also hear from Anna Shepard, who's the conservation specialist, and her work focuses on treating and caring for special collections. You'll also hear from Wendy Kieser, who is the collection management operations specialist, and her work focuses on managing print collections in our libraries across campus, including space planning and collections moves. So our story begins in 2017, when the University of Minnesota received funding from the state legislature and Governor Dayton to construct a health sciences education center in the heart of the academic health campus, which is located on the east bank of the Mississippi River. The vision for the Health Sciences Education Center building was to create a state-of-the-art facility designed to transform health education in Minnesota and to become the premier training site for tomorrow's health professional. Two of the university's libraries, the Health Sciences Library and the Wangenstein Historical Library of Biology and Medicine, were to be included as core parts of this new building and its education initiatives. Here's a rendering of the new Health Sciences Library entrance. And here's a rendering of the Wangenstein Historical Library, which was meant to be highly visible in the Health Sciences Education building. As you can see, the entrance to the library includes an exhibit space. What the new building would not include was space for collection storage. This meant that for our Health Sciences Library, most of the collection would remain in the old building and would be accessible via paging. However, there was funding for new collection storage space and shelving for both the Wangenstein Historical Library and a small portion of the most frequently used Health Sciences Library's materials. These collections would be relocated to the basement level of an adjacent building to be closer to the new library spaces. The space would have environmental controls intended for rare books, as well as a gas fire suppression system. So just to orient you a little bit, here's a map of the three buildings involved. We were moving out of Deal Hall, which is the building on the bottom. The libraries were being relocated to the HSEC building, which is on the right, and the Wangenstein collections were moving to the Phillips Wangenstein building at the top of the map. One important thing to know about our campus is that many of our buildings are connected by a series of underground tunnels, which we call the Gopher Way. The gold line on the map represents the Gopher Way here. So even though the collections were moving, we never had to actually move them outside or load them into a vehicle. A little bit about the Wangenstein Historical Library, which is the collection we're focusing on today. The Wangenstein has a collection of over 71,000 rare texts ranging from 1480 to 1930. It also has over 8,000 artifacts. The collection is used for research, teaching, and coursework in the history of medicine and many other subjects. It has a particularly strong focus in anatomy, surgery, natural history, botany, and alchemy. The collection has been used in lots of really unexpected ways, and I wanted to just share a couple of examples from news headlines. On the left is a 2016 story that was on Minnesota Public Radio, which featured the Wangenstein's collection of rare recipe books that date back from the 1500s. The quirk about historical recipe books is that they contain advice on just about anything, from instructions on caring for your armor to curing your cow's cough to even baking a cake. On the right is a 2019 New York Times story about a partnership between Wangenstein curators and Tattersall Distilling in Minneapolis to recreate historic recipes for distilling alcohol, including plague water. In terms of the artifact collections, there are many types of objects, but some of the most common categories included medical instruments, pharmaceutical products, historical machines and equipment, historical teaching models, doctors' traveling cases, and truly so much more. Here's one of our favorite examples of so much more. This is a case of glass eyeballs. I believe this is a salesman's display case that might have been taken to places where there were likely to be potential customers, say a 19th century factory floor. All right, so let's get down to business. Once we learned that the Wangenstein collections would be moving, we needed to begin developing extensive plans and procedures for each of these components. We needed to work with the curators and the architects to design the collection storage and develop a fit plan. By fit plan, I mean we needed a final layout for the monograph and serials collections, and then an exact plan for where each and every object would be located and how much space it needed. This was by far the most complex part of the move, and Anna and Wendy will talk about this in more detail. We also needed to develop packing and moving procedures, including handling guidelines to ensure the collections move safely. We needed to determine how the collections move would be staffed, who would do the work of packing and actually moving everything from point A to point B. And we needed to determine the logistics of the move, including transport and security. Our project team included folks not just from Wangenstein and our department, but from across the libraries and campus units. Here's a picture of the Wangenstein curators with one of our facilities and operations staff. Here's a timeline of major parts of the projects we'll discuss today. We learned about funding for the building in spring of 2017 and started really actively working on the building design with the architects in spring of 2018. From there, we spent about 3 years actually preparing for the move, which happened this past summer. The move was originally scheduled for winter break around December 2020, but was pushed back by about 6 months due to COVID because we weren't able to work in the buildings. So I want to note a couple of initial considerations in terms of planning for storage. Because we were moving to an existing building with a limited footprint that is actually smaller than the old space, we knew from the beginning we needed to maximize the efficiency of the space with storage. So even very early on in the project, we knew that the rare books would be in compact shelving and that the objects would be housed in a combination of static and compact shelving, with a combination of shelves and drawers of various sizes. Also, because many of the items in the artifact collection are very small, we knew we would need to include some kind of dividers in some of the drawers to separate artifacts and make them more easily findable. We initially looked at making dividers or trays out of archival board, but the curators determined that what they actually wanted were metal dividers that were custom fit for the drawers. And this added another level of precision and complexity to the project. I want to talk a little bit about staffing too. Early on, we had to determine how we were going to staff the project, whether we would use library staff or movers. We move collections all the time here, and in the past, we had moved another rare book collection using library staff and student employees. But looking back on that experience, while it gave us a lot of control over the project, it also required a lot of staff time and coordination. So for this project, we determined that a hybrid approach is what would work best. So we determined that the library's staff would be responsible for developing procedures and the overall plan for the move, packing and unpacking all of the artifacts, and that we would then pair libraries' permanent and temporary staff with the movers to answer any questions they had, troubleshoot problems, monitor them to make sure they were handling the collections carefully and keeping everything in call number order. Then the movers would be responsible for pulling bound volumes from the old location and shelving them in the new location, packing and wrapping the rare book trucks with padding and shrink wrap, and moving both artifact and book collections to the new location. In terms of security, we were mostly concerned about the rare books collection while it was actually in transit between the two locations. In this case, the books were going down one elevator, through a tunnel, and down another elevator to get to their final destination. We considered having a security escort to walk with the movers as they pushed the books through the tunnels. But as we discussed it more, we realized that the risk of theft was probably very low. Our biggest concern actually was that busy medical students would be walking through the tunnel while looking at their phones and might actually run into the movers pushing large wooden trucks, or vice versa. So Wendy developed a plan to have a series of library staff stationed at intervals along the path where the movers would be taking the trucks on their twice daily routes between locations. The library staff also did the very important job of calling the elevators for the movers, which sped up the process. Here's Wendy's map, and as you can see, each smiley face represents a person. So before I turn this over to Anna and Wendy, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges of this project, of which there were many. Here are some images of our old storage space and the storage furniture. The artifact collections were stored across several rooms, tucked away in corners around the perimeter of the rare book stacks, and it made it very difficult to retrieve artifacts for preparation and packing. Here are some images of the rare book stacks, which have very narrow aisles. And as you can see, there are many fragile and damaged volumes in the collection. The collection also contains lots of fragile artifacts, particularly a lot of glass. On the left there, you can see an example from the collection of historic infant feeding tubes. And the collection also contains many pharmaceutical bottles, some of which actually still contain liquids that the curators wanted to retain. So we had to work with environmental health and safety on campus to identify any hazardous substances that needed to be transported and stored separately. Another challenge was that there was almost no physical or intellectual control over the artifact collection. Access to the collection really had depended on the curator's knowledge of where items were stored. And finally, as you can see, the collection is clearly very heterogeneous, ranging from tiny medical instruments to very large pieces of furniture. So, in order to address the challenges, we needed to take on several projects. The first is a housing project for damaged books. While we won't discuss it in great detail today, we did undertake a process to identify particularly fragile and rare books in the collection, measure them, and have custom-made boxes made by a vendor. Here's a picture of one of our colleagues getting boxes ready to go on the books. We also needed to undertake a project to measure barcode and inventory artifacts to have the data required to create basic catalog records and determine how they would be laid out in the storage. Finally, we needed to develop a fit plan for both the artifacts and the rare books. Now I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who will talk about inventory and packing artifacts.
I'm Anna Shepard, and I'm a conservation specialist for the University of Minnesota Libraries. My role and responsibilities for this collection move centered around the artifact collection. So in planning for the move, we had to undertake an in-depth artifact inventory, which was no small task. With the help of some excellent student staff, we measured and recorded some basic information about each of the over 8,000 artifacts. This was an important step because it allowed us to create a detailed fit plan for the artifact. It also allowed us to gain a little more intellectual control over the collection so that it could be better organized and more accessible once it was moved. To the right of this slide is a screenshot of our Google inventory form. What we captured with the form included the new tag and barcode numbers for each artifact, the title and any descriptive information such as a label for each artifact, the artifact's old location, which collection each artifact belonged to. So there were discrete collections within the whole artifact collection that we wanted to capture. The measurements of each artifact, the length, width, and height. The object type, which might include instrument, equipment, pharmaceutical product, furniture, among a few other categories. The object material, which might be wood, glass, metal, paper, plastic, or some combination of those. Whether the artifact contained a substance and if that substance was known. So many of the artifacts contained pills, powders, liquids, and we wanted to make sure to capture this with our inventory. And then lastly, any condition or handling issues that were pertinent to each artifact, and a notes field for further details. The inventory really informed the FIT plan. So our facilities staff and some Wangenstein staff did an initial measurement of the entire collection that we used to form the final FIT plan, and then the inventory filled in some gaps for us there. The inventory helped to group like artifacts together. So that was our primary goal, is to put like objects together. And then beyond those groupings, the artifacts were organized by size. Collection staff and data management staff were involved to help corral information gained through the inventory, and then to organize this data to create a comprehensive FIT plan. This whole process took over a year to complete, and it was very complex. In the process, we discovered some useful software. It was a spreadsheet solver that packing companies use to place items in bins or drawers. And here's a visualization of the drawer packing software once all of the artifacts have been placed. It's very colorful, as you'll notice. I've provided a link for the spreadsheet solver in the resources handout. To give us a sense of how long packing the artifacts would take, we performed a pilot packing project. With a small group of staff to help, we timed how long it took us to pull artifacts from a sample of drawers and shelves. We then used those times divided by the number of artifacts per shelf or drawer to calculate approximately how long it would take on average to pull each artifact in the collection. This was very useful information during the months of pulling and packing artifacts leading up to the move, so that we made sure we would have enough staff and time to complete the artifact packing process in advance of the move. In addition, the pilot project helped our inform our packing procedures. It was very important to ensure that all the artifacts would be stable on the new compact shelving and that they would be safe during the transportation process. Using pull lists that Wendy generated, we got to work pulling and packing the artifacts. For the pharmacy product, which accounted for about half of the artifact collection, we found that pulling a whole box of these product and then sorting them into boxes labeled with their final location was the simplest and most efficient way to pack. For the remaining drawers and shelves, we would hunt through all of the collection spaces, pulling specific artifacts to be packed together. Then we would place them on shelves until the entire drawer or shelf was ready, and then carefully pack each shelf or drawer together into one box whenever possible. Sometimes the artifacts were too large to be packed together into a box, and we just made sure to label them really clearly. We created helpful procedures for troubleshooting problems during the packing process, and we adhered to packing procedures tailored to handling different types of artifacts. We also used procedures for building custom supports for fragile, unusually shaped, and large artifacts so that they would remain stable in their new storage locations. Here are two examples of custom supports that we use regularly. On the left are accordion dividers for keeping small artifacts organized in their drawers. And on the right is a procedure for making backer rod rings for artifacts that have round or unstable bases that would be sitting on shelving. This website, the acronym is STASH, which stands for Storage Techniques for Art, Science, and History, is a really good resource for all kinds of storage solutions and techniques. And there's a link on the slide, and I've also provided a link in the handout. So some examples of packing challenges that we encountered. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a large glass X-ray tube, which was very fragile and needed a custom enclosure to be safely moved. There were unusually shaped sharp metal instruments. We had a prosthetic wooden leg. In the center of the screen here, you'll see early Edo period Japanese acupuncture mannequins, which are very fragile. Delicate medical models, and a large, extremely heavy cast iron still, which is pictured on the left of the slide. Here is a photo of some of our vast supply of packing materials on the left. And on the right, you'll see one of our staff carefully packing artifacts in bubble wrap. It was very important to have staff that we could trust to handle the artifacts safely and carefully so that there were no casualties during the packing process. The process of packing required a huge amount of supplies for the large fragile artifacts we were dealing with. In the process of pulling and packing, some artifacts got missed or were being used for classes. We then created a procedure for gathering these missed items at the end of the process so that they could be incorporated into the new storage space. So packing the artifacts into drawers. We were able to negotiate with the shelving vendor to have some of the drawers brought up to the old Wangenstein location, which made packing dense drawers full of more than 100 pharmaceutical products and lots of metal dividers much easier to just pack the artifacts directly in the drawers and then wrap them and have them brought to their new space. After packing about half of the pharmaceutical product drawers like this, we had the movers take them down to the new space and install them. Through this process, we learned that although this was an ideal workflow for us, it presented a challenge for the movers, and we made the decision to transition to packing the drawers directly in the new space. This was a big pivot in our process, but it was one we had the flexibility to make work, and it was helpful to work together with the movers to create a plan. Here you'll see all of the boxes of packed artifacts ready to be moved down to the new space. While packing took many, many months for us, the professional movers were able to move everything within a few days, which is amazing. On the right, you'll see I'm packing a drawer full of artifacts in the old Wangenstein suite. And lastly, here's some photos of the unpacked artifacts in their new storage locations and drawers. Everything is well organized, and it should be much easier for staff to locate and use the collection. Now I'll turn things over to Wendy.
Hello, my name is Wendy Kieser, and I was the project manager for this move. As Mary and Anna have indicated, this was a very unique and complex project. It involved many people from many different departments and skill sets to get it all done. The first phase of the project that I was involved in was making sure the drawer and shelving dimensions met our needs and all of the artifacts had a location in the new space. The primary challenge to this phase was that we had no access to the new space as it was still under construction. All of our planning was done from a set of floor plans such as this and drawings of shelving units. As Anna described earlier, the artifacts were carefully measured. Those measurements were used to determine how much shelf clearance was needed and how deep the drawers needed to be. After the objects were grouped by height, the rest of the measurements were used to determine which objects would fit together on a shelf or in a drawer. This information was pulled together in a master spreadsheet from which we created a pull list for each individual shelf or drawer. The pull lists were defined by their row, vertical section, and finally the assigned shelf or drawer numbered consecutively from top to bottom. After construction was complete, and by the time our fit plans were written, we were finally able to access our wonderful new space and start placing all of the artifacts. Overall, our plan worked well, and I don't believe we had any shelves or drawers that did not have enough space to hold their assigned artifacts. After everything was in place, we did spend some time making small adjustments to where some of the artifacts were placed. The changes were an attempt to keep similar items together and to more evenly distribute the artifacts within the drawers. The second phase of the move involved the rare book collection. In preparation for moving the books, we measured the collection. The collection contained both books and journals. The books had two classification systems, Dewey and NLM, and size designations of small, octavo, quarto, folio, oversized, and flats. In our new space, there were 3 sections of compact shelving divided by journals, book classification system, and size. To move the books to the new space, we had 4 different size moving carts, and those carts were we used trays approximately 18 inches long to move the books. The trays gave us extra protection for the books and made it easier to pull the books due to the limited space in the stacks and the sides of our moving carts. Each cart had between 16 and 18 trays, depending on the size of the moving cart. After the books were loaded into the trays, we added bubble wrap to make sure the books would not slide around in the trays during transport, and wrapped each moving cart in plastic from top to bottom for extra security and protection should a moving cart tip over. Once transported to the new location, we reversed the process, unwrapping and unloading the carts onto the compact shelving. After all the books were in place, we did a final inventory of the collection. The inventory allowed us to verify that the items were in call number order and that what was on the shelf matched the holdings in our catalog. Beyond the focus of preparing the artifacts and paper collections for the move, there were a few other logistics we needed to consider. The moving cart size. Were the shelves on the carts high enough or deep enough to properly support the books, and which size books could we place on each type of cart? The door and elevator openings. Would the moving carts fit through the doorways, and how many carts could we get on each elevator ride? The fewer trucks per elevator ride meant it would take us much more time to transfer the material to its new location. Security. Considering the value of the collection, did we need a police officer involved in the move, or could we use library staff to supervise the path of the materials being transferred? Staffing. How many people did we need? What should we have in-house staff do versus what should we hire movers to do? Every part of this project was a challenge and pushed our team to be extra organized, creative, and flexible. But if I could pick just one thing during the move that made it successful, it would be the work we did to prepare and the work we did with the moving team. Our preparations included creating short job descriptions for our staff that explained what we expected each person to do when working with the movers. This was also used to help us determine how many library staff members were needed and when they were needed. We had at least 2 walkthroughs with the moving company before we ever got started to review timelines, point out large objects that would need to be moved and objects that would need special handling. We took the time on the first day to introduce ourselves and our project to the moving team. We offered information on what the project was about, what was held in the collection, and encouraged them to ask us any questions they had about the collection. We paired up each mover handling the books with a staff member and made sure that they knew we were there to help with any questions and deal with any problems that came across in the stacks. We made sure that the movers were really part of our team. We explained our expectations for the move and took their advice on efficiencies and changes in the process as we all worked through the project together. We requested a consistent team from the moving company. In doing this, we saved time with daily retraining of staff, and we felt like it offered the opportunity for a deeper level of personal engagement from all involved. What we discovered through this process was that the movers asked questions, identified efficiencies, and in fact, in the end, were reminding us of our own procedures. It was important to us to have the movers be part of the team and not just the muscle for the project. We considered them professionals who brought a different type of expertise to the project and that we could also learn from their experience. We found our moving team to be genuinely interested in how the collections were moved, and they really were an invaluable part of this project. And back to Mary.
Thank you, Wendy. So we wanted to share a few lessons learned from our experience with this project. The first is that it really and truly takes a village. We had over 60 people involved in preparing for the move, and that doesn't even count the movers. Second is that, not surprisingly, it takes a lot of time. We were very lucky to have 3 years to plan for this project, and we feel like we needed every minute of that time. A small silver lining of the COVID shutdown was that it gave us additional time to work on planning for the project. Another thing we found is that it takes a lot of headspace. We have found that these types of projects totally engage your brain because you're constantly problem solving and thinking on your feet. We all had other projects and other work to get done during this time, but we recommend giving project staff as much dedicated time as possible for projects like these. We also found that it takes a lot of thinking outside the box, even though frequently we were dealing with boxes. For example, we never anticipated using software used by shipping vendors for artifact layouts, but it was very useful. And finally, with proper preparation, it's much easier to pivot when things don't go according to plan. And of course, things will not always go according to plan. I have an image over here. Wendy had laid out dozens or even hundreds of signs like this around the new and old collection storage spaces, carefully labeling the shelves so that the movers could see where to go next. She created really detailed procedures and shared them with libraries project staff. And what all of that meant was that someone who was not as familiar with our plan could figure out what was happening and jump in to help direct the movers if Wendy was called off to another location. Finally, was it all worth it? Yes, this move was more complicated than any of us imagined, but it is so satisfying to see the collection stored in an optimal environment that will help protect it for decades to come. It's also really exciting to see the collection stored and organized in a way that makes it easier for the curators to access the artifacts and to have catalog records for the artifacts. During the move, the curators were identifying new objects they had actually never seen before and were really excited to use for teaching. So that's all we have for today. I want to thank you for your time and attention. Here's our contact information if you have questions about the project. And as Anna mentioned, there is a handout with additional resources for conservation supplies and packing ideas located in the conference schedule for this session. Thank you again.